There are 5 Japanese books with ideas that could help improve your life. I'm actually staying in the Japanese countryside right now, so I have a lot of time to go through these books and really think about these ideas. But for each of these books, I'll go through each of the key takeaways. And some of these are bestsellers in Japan that actually haven't been translated to English yet. I'll make sure to include timestamps, so feel free to skip around the video. This is the first book, The Courage to be Disliked, 嫌われる勇気. Among this list is actually the most popular book here. It's sold more than 3 million copies, which is pretty massive for the population of Japan. And from the title of the book, The Courage to be Disliked, you might think that it's some sort of motivational message like the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F***, but it's really quite different. The ideas in the book stem from a philosopher called Adler, and it has some pretty contrarian views on happiness, relationships, and fulfillment. It follows first principle thinking, which is to break down complex ideas into the most basic truths. The format of the book, it's a conversation between a philosopher and a student, and the student's feeling stuck in life, so he goes to this philosopher for help. There are 3 major concepts in the book. The first is that trauma is a narrative choice. The student in the book gives an example where he has a friend that hasn't left his house in several years, and he says that this was caused by a trauma where he was bullied and he had a lot of pressure from his parents, so he's forced to become a shut-in. One of the first contrarian statements in the book is that trauma doesn't exist. In traditional Western psychology, it's pretty widely accepted that trauma does exist, and whatever trauma you might have, it shapes your identity and the actions that you do today. But from Adlerian psychology, rather than the cause being the trauma that he had and the effect being him not wanting to leave the house, the book argues that it's actually the inverse. So the person first had the desire to not leave the house and instead created a narrative to justify his behavior. So the trauma is sort of a narrative that the brain tells itself so that there is no cognitive dissonance between the thing that you want to do right now. The person isn't actually limited by his past trauma. He's actively choosing his current situation. So rather than the traditional ideology of trying to work through your trauma to improve your situation, Adlerian psychology says that you should instead focus on improving your current situation and only focus on the things that you can control and not your past. And I think from reading this is a lot more empowering as a mental framework because it makes your life way more actionable. The second major idea of the book is that all problems are interpersonal problems or relationship problems. So in the book, the student kind of pours all of his problems out at the philosopher, like his insecurities, inferiority that he feels, and his financial situation. And the philosopher basically responds by saying that all of his problems have one thing in common, which is that all of these problems only exist because he's comparing himself to somebody else. And if there were no people and there were no interpersonal relationships, then he wouldn't have any of these problems. Even for something like financial stability, if there was nobody to compare yourself with, then there would be no sense of what it means to be financially free or financially stable. So that problem wouldn't even exist. So on a practical level, the book presents a way to deal with these problems called the separation of tasks. So for any problem that you have, because it's most likely an interpersonal problem, you can actually separate them into 2 parts. The first is your own problem, and the second is other people's problem. And all you have to focus on is your own problem. So for example, if you wanted to quit your job and pursue something that you're passionate about, but your parents or your partner don't agree with you, you can separate this into 2 problems. The first problem is you quitting. And the second problem is what other people will think of you once you've quit. So rather than worrying about pleasing other people or trying to solve how other people are going to react to what you are going to do, all you have to worry about is solving the thing that you can control. And you might think that this is probably a selfish way of thinking, but the book makes the argument that this is actually a healthier way of maintaining relationships because you're respecting other people's decisions and not trying to interfere in what they do. The third concept of the book explains why the book is called The Courage to be Disliked. It's that you are disliked by someone. It is proof that you're exercising your freedom and living in freedom, and a sign that you are living in accordance with your own principles. Being disliked by other people is proof that you're living authentically to yourself and doing the things that you can control. It's a symptom that you're doing something correctly. At the end of the book, it talks about one of the most fulfilling things that you can do, which is to focus on your contribution to others and for the greater community. There's actually a sequel to this book called The Courage to be Happy, which it talks about that idea furthermore, but I'll talk about that in a different video. The second book is called Goodbye Things. 僕たちにもうモノは必要ない. So this book is written by this pretty extreme Japanese minimalist, and there's actually a few videos that you can find that they've made about him on YouTube. In the book, he talks about his whole journey of becoming a minimalist. Before he became a minimalist, he found himself pretty unhappy in this overly consumerism society. He said that he would often buy things just to chase this sort of happiness, and he would also compare himself to other people when they had something that he didn't. By reading this, it's given me a new perspective, first on what an average person might feel living in Japan, especially working in the Japanese culture, but also it's made me really think about the highest forms of utility for money. And for me, it's definitely not buying more things. So I want to share 3 quick takeaways from the book. The first is that placing less value on things save you more time. A lot of modern day shopping today involves trying to find the best value for your dollar. And that could be trying to find the best coffee machine or even trying to find the best place to eat when you're looking for a restaurant. But imagine how much time you could get back if you weren't distracted by trying to find the best thing. You'd spend less time distracted by commercials, less time trying to find the best value, and more time to actually focus on the things that matter to you. Japanese minimalism, as I understand it from this book, is really built on the idea that there's nothing that you're already lacking in your life. And so by spending less time trying to find more things or the better thing to add to your life, you can spend that time to experience more of life with people you care about. The second is that one of the highest utilities of money is to invest in experiences and not things. Personally, for me, I found that investing in experiences, especially with other people, to be one of the most fulfilling things that I can do. In the book Dial Zero, it talks about this idea called memory dividends, which is to invest in experiences so that you have memories to look back on throughout your entire life. The third takeaway is that having less things improves your focus. When you have less things, there's less things that you have to keep track of. And so there's less clutter in your mind. I really feel this whenever I buy something that needs to connect to the internet and has software updates because it really makes it a headache to manage. So I try to avoid that. Through reading this book, and especially with this point, it's really encouraged me to start to get rid of stuff that I don't really use that much or things that are kind of a headache in my life. So it's really made me think about what are the things that I really need to be happy, and it's really not that much. I'm definitely not a minimalist, and I don't think I'll get rid of everything I own anytime soon. But this book has really helped me reflect on what truly matters, which for me are experiences and relationships. The third book is called The Power of Journaling, Memo no Maruku. This is a bestseller in Japan that actually hasn't been translated to English yet. And this is also the only book in this list that I made a dedicated video about before. So this book is written by a successful Japanese entrepreneur who credits a lot of his success to the frequency and the way that he journals about different ideas. If you've seen videos on my channel, then you know that journaling is something I've been doing for a really long time now. And I've definitely experienced all the same benefits. Not all journaling methods are equal. For example, focused journaling or deliberately tracking your life is going to be far more rewarding than doing something like morning pages where you just write down random stuff for 5 minutes a day. So a majority of the book is explaining the best way to reflect on your ideas. The author explains that there are 2 types of notes. The first are notes that help you remember facts, and the second are notes that help you extract insights. So when you actually want to reflect on an idea or journal intentionally, what you can do is to separate these 2 things so that first you're journaling about the facts and then you're reflecting on it in a separate paragraph. The book also talks about some pretty underrated benefits of journaling, like how it actually makes you a better speaker because you're forced to think clearly and linearly when you write. It also talks about how in the modern age, because most people take notes digitally, people's perception of you at the workplace or in school when you take notes with pen and paper is significantly higher. Personally, I have 2 notebooks. So I have my main one, which I use for reflection, and I also have a pocket notebook that I carry around with me, especially now because I'm living in Japan for the next month or so. I found it fun to carry around my pocket notebook and write down different words that I've learned, sometimes sketch on the train, or just flip through it instead of scrolling on my phone. In the book, the author says that journaling is the best way to get to know yourself, and he includes nearly 1,000 prompts that you can use to get to know yourself better. But because the book hasn't been translated to English yet, I personally translated nearly 100 of them and included in my journaling prompts pack, which you can find on my website. Journaling, when done right, is one of the most powerful and rewarding things that you can do. The 4th book is called The Practice of Not Reacting, 反応しない練習. So this book is actually written by a Buddhist monk, and he talks about a Zen Buddhist method to remove any stress or worry from your life that is really rooted in logic. Similar to the first book, everything is built up from first principles, so there's almost no religion or spirituality involved in this book. This book has been one of the #1 books on Amazon Japan for a number of years now, and it has over 10,000 reviews at a 4.4 star average. So the author studied the works of the Buddha for a number of years, and the Buddha is actually a real historical figure that had a lot of students under him. But the author compiled the most practical takeaways into this book. And the main goal of the book is to show you a practical way to really eradicate any stress or suffering, as they say in Buddhism, from your mind. So first, the author defines what stress and worry is, and they all stem from things that you cannot control. It makes sense that all forms of stress stem from things that you cannot control or solve immediately, because if you could solve it immediately, then it wouldn't become a form of stress. In Buddhism, they specifically call this suffering, and they identified 8 different types of it. So stress is essentially a reaction to something that we cannot solve immediately. And if you were to rank the things that cause you the most amount of annoyance, frustration, or stress, it would probably be the things that you cannot control the most at the top of the list. For example, if you were stuck in traffic and you were late to an appointment, you would feel stressed because you cannot control traffic in that situation. So the author says that because you can't change the external situation immediately, the only thing that you can do is to change your reaction to it. In the traffic example, because there's nothing you can do to change the situation, the only thing that you can do is to wait patiently in traffic. If you simply choose to not react to it, then you won't feel any stress towards it, which sounds a lot easier to do than in practice, especially if you've experienced LA traffic. But the monk explains a 3-part method to do this in practice when you're feeling stressed, annoyed, or angry. So you can try this out the next time. The first is to use language to explain what you're feeling bad about through logic. And you could do this by talking to yourself or journaling, but the reason why this is important is because stress or any emotion is just an abstract reaction to a situation. And by putting it into your words, you're using your conscious mind to really define the situation. The second step is to figure out what reaction you're actually having to it. In Buddhism, they really emphasize identifying emotions as granularly as possible. So in this case, it could be anger, frustration, annoyance, or sadness. You can even close your eyes to have less input so that you can really focus on what you're actually feeling. And the third step is to try and separate the reaction from the situation in the first step. This is definitely something that takes practice over time. That's why you see monks meditating for years and years. But one of the biggest takeaways that I have from the book is that you're really not your emotions or your thoughts. You can choose to react to any of them, or you can just choose to observe them. Your attention is really dictated by your conscious mind. So even though emotions and thoughts arise subconsciously, we have a choice of what emotions and thoughts we focus on. And our individual perception of reality is really dictated by that lens. This is the 5th book. It's called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. 走ることについて語るときに僕の語ること。僕の語ること。走ることについて語る。走ることについて語るときに僕の語ること。This book is written by Haruki Murakami, who's this pretty famous author even in America. He mostly writes fiction books, but this book specifically is about his obsession for running for the past few decades. He's in his 70s now, and in his life he's ran over 30 marathons. One of his races was actually 62 miles without stopping. And as someone who just ran their first marathon last year, it's really inspiring to read about his obsession with running and what discipline really means to him. Murakami is really well known for his daily routine, which this is the book where he shared it for the first time. It basically looks like this. He wakes up at 4, writes for 8 hours, and then at noon he works out for 2 hours, either swimming or running. And for the rest of the day, he basically just chills out, he reads books or listens to music, and he goes to bed at 9 p.m. After I read this book, I've basically been following a formula for the past 6 months, and I can say it's really been great for my personal productivity and discipline. It's pretty interesting the way that he sees his routine and his commitment to writing. It's the same way that he sees his marathon training. It's something that requires discipline, commitment, and repetition, even when it feels boring. There's a word in Japanese called Migaku, which is the concept of refining something through consistent effort, care, and repetition. And when I read Japanese books and learn about Japanese culture, I can see that this is something that is really valued in Japanese society. Whereas in the West, there's a big emphasis on autonomy and financial freedom. In Japan, I think it's really about the depths and mastery that people reach within their craft. In many ways, the book is not about running at all. He sees running as a metaphor for everything in his life. He says in the book, most of what I know about writing, I've learned through running every day. There's another book which has really changed the way that I see productivity, but it's not a Japanese book. I made another video talking about it, which you can check out right here. I'll see you in that video. Let's get it.